What is up, everybody, and welcome to FLW Videos. I've ended up running across some very interesting information centered around catching raid bosses in Pokemon Go. So the Silph Road team ended up posting on the Silph Road website an interesting study and some hidden multipliers that are embedded within the raid Pokemon, and it could actually end up changing the strategy for how you approach catching legendary Pokemon, and it's especially relevant for something like Pokemon Go Fest Day 2. So if I were to ask you the question, what is the best way to catch yourself a legendary raid boss? Besides getting yourself that guaranteed catch of a shiny, you're going to be saying things like, well, of course you want to use a golden raspberry. You want to hit an excellent throw. You want it to be a curveball. You want to make sure that you have the medals for the Pokemon's type that you are trying to catch. And yes, all of that is true. Those do increase your chances of catching the Pokemon. And then of course, if you can do it over time, you're just increasing your chances every time you do it. But there is a hidden multiplier, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. And of course, talking about strategies that I'm going to be using moving forward for that. But anyways, if you do enjoy this episode and find it helpful, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. We're actually going to skip the intro for time's sake and jump right into this. So let's go ahead and head over to the article. They end up titling this the catch mechanics of raid bosses. And of course, what we talked about earlier, we've got those multipliers that we mentioned, and nothing new about that it is discovered in these findings, but instead there is an additional multiplier, and it's all centered around the number of throws that you have made on the legendary or just regular raid boss, which makes a lot of sense. But let's dive into this. It makes sense anecdotally as far as what I've experienced, and maybe you've experienced it as well, but we will be talking about that. But basically what ends up happening is for the first 3 to 4 throws, you end up having a hidden multiplier that's around a 1, which basically means it's just there. It's not helping you increase your chances, but as time goes on, the number of throws that you make, once you get up into like the 5th throw, you end up increasing your chances of catching the legendary raid boss. And then finally up around the 8 to number 10 throw, you end up getting up to the peak as far as that hidden multiplier is concerned, where on like the 9th throw, for example, in their sample, it ended up being almost a hidden multiplier of 2 versus a hidden multiplier of 1 on the first throw. So what the heck does this mean? This ends up meaning that you have a better chance of catching the legendary raid boss once you end up getting into like the 8th throw, 9th throw, or 10th throw compared to the first throw. So what are the practical kind of ramifications of this? Well, first things first, think about all of those resources of you using a golden raz, you're hitting an excellent throw, you're doing everything right in the first 2, 3, 4 throws, and you just don't catch this legendary raid boss. It can be very frustrating when you find yourself getting up into the 7th, 8th, 9th throw before you're finally able to catch it. And even worse when you're doing something like a raid hour, you're participating in a wafu, which means you just go raid to raid to raid to raid. And then something like Go Fest Day 2, where you could be getting a ton of invites. You don't want to be sitting there trying to catch a Pokemon for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but you want to do it effectively. Now, as far as hardcore players are concerned, what they have done in the past is they've just said, you know what? I'll throw a golden raz on the Pokemon. I'll throw it once, do a quick catch, and just move on because it takes way too long to catch a Pokemon. Well, now what this means is that for hardcore players, surprisingly enough, it could actually make sense to just dump off maybe 5 balls and then end up throwing out that golden raz, and then of course trying to hit an excellent and then run, because it's not going to take very long to just dump off those balls. It's just so funny because it reminds me of like the last ball challenge that you would do with a shiny legendary, but of course that's a guaranteed catch. But ironically enough, there ends up being some practicality for this for hardcore players. And then for regular players, I include myself in that. What this ends up meaning is if you go out there and you're like me, where maybe you use Pineapps like the first 5 to 6 throws before you try to switch over to golden raz, what you may want to do instead is just not use a berry on the first 5 throws. And of course, if you're pressed for time, it may make sense to just dump them then, but if you want to still keep your chances up and you're not worried about resources, just keep doing what you're doing with a golden raspberry. But if you're low on golden raz, if you want to use your resources most efficiently, it may make sense to just not use them on the first 4 throws and then start using some berries a little bit later on. And this has become more accessible than what you would think. If I were to tell you this a year ago, you may end up going in there and doing a raid and getting like 7 premier balls. And of course, that wouldn't make a lot of sense to do this method, but what's happening now is because they're getting away from team-based and instead focusing on how quickly can you take down a raid boss, you end up seeing people basically getting 15, 16, 17, 18 plus premier balls when you go in to catch that raid. So the first 5 throws are not as impactful because you have so many throws to end up making. And so for me, what I'm thinking is I just may end up saving some resources, especially for day 2 of GoFest, and just not use my Pineapps on these first 5 throws. Why not go ahead and just try to catch it and then go ahead and dive into some silver Pineapps and Pineapps a little bit later on. But I personally do think that this makes a lot of sense from the past. As far as my experience is concerned, I tend to catch a lot more of these Pokemon later into the rounds, you know, from throw maybe 5 to like throw 12 or so. But I would love to know what you think about this in the comments section below. Do you think that you'll end up changing your strategy, or are you just gonna stick to what you're doing now? I would definitely love to know what your experience is, and if this makes sense to you based on your experience, definitely let me know. And of course, I'm going to give a huge shout out to the supporters over at Patreon. They are members of the exclusive Discord channel, and we are going to be rating and coordinating for Pokemon Go Fest Day 2. So if you want to find some trainers that you can trust in, we are a small community for now, and it's great. So definitely check out that Patreon tier in the description below, and I will see you next time.